Yeah, go do the formalities. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. It's Meg here from the iMoot team. Just welcoming Shane, otherwise known as my boss, on board. Shane is, of course, well known around Moodle as being one of the original developers and general Moodle guru. And, of course, now heads up Moodle partner Pukunui here in Australia. He's over in Perth at the moment. So thank you, Shane. Take it away.
Thanks. I thought I'd put my webcam on. Hello, everyone. All right. My apologies for being late. I had a previous appointment and ran slightly over, and then I had to race. So dare say I've got a few speeding tickets. Okay. And I'm looking above the camera because multiple screens. And yeah, kia ora, Tabitha. You'll be happy to know my lunch today consists of an L&P peanut slab. That's awesome. All right, so they're really good actually. So let me go into what I want to present today, and I guess I'll start with a whole range of excuses. This was a very last-minute presentation. Basically, Wendy and Vinny, who were sorting out the program, had a hole, and I said I would fill in any gap, and then they gave me like a couple of days warning. And then Vinny suggested, I asked him what topic, and he suggested we look at security. A few people have been talking about it. And I thought, well, actually, as it turns out, quite often when we run Moodle training, I quite often end up doing a security talk with people, and usually it's with people who are not IT people. They're facilitators or administrators on the side, or people who have been thrown into the role, and they're a bit worried because they don't have an IT background. And so what I've really done is this presentation is kind of, just gonna take one of these out, is really I guess a non-techie talk. And I can get very technical, so if I go that way, please forgive me. And if you are a very technical person, I'm kind of very deliberately keeping it as simple as I can, and covering the bases, I guess, the main things to look at. So this presentation, it's not in depth in any way. I guess you could probably talk a whole week on security. Note, I'm not an expert in actually any of these fields, any of the areas I'll be looking at, but probably a lot of experience. Yeah. And I've got a note here that the images I've used should be under Creative Commons, but I didn't test them, didn't check them all. So if they're not, and you know, and you're watching this recording later, and it's an image I shouldn't be using, let me know. All the use is non-commercial. So I just thought I'd put that in. Briefly about me, I thought I'd wear multiple hats, so I thought I'd try and show some hats. Most of the hat images you get are basically caps with words written on them. I guess the hats, I wear a lot of hats, you know, as we all do. So I guess it kind of defines who I am and what I do now. I guess my background to Moodle is probably the more important one. When I finished uni, I worked at various jobs. I did finish up with a IT degree, IT maths physics degree, and went into education. So I spent 2 years doing education, a postgraduate honours degree in education. And then I did go teaching for a while. I got over that very quickly. You know, I really liked the students, actually quite liked the teaching, really didn't like all the admin work and the things. And I was teaching at various schools that probably weren't geared towards having a good structure. And at the same time, I was ending that up, I was working as a researcher at Curtin University, and I'd also met Martin. We'd met through common friends, and we actually worked on some IT projects in the late 90s. And when he started his PhD, which was on Moodle, and he was working as the webmaster at Curtin University, he needed someone to help him with Moodle as it got more popular. So I used to work at his house in the very early days, in a little desk, and would be rocking his kids to sleep under the desk and programming away. So that's my introduction to Moodle. As Meg said, these days we're with Pukunui. We're one of the Moodle partner companies. We were one of the first, I think 3 or 4 of us joined about the same time. And that was just around the idea. Martin was very interested in the open source nature of Moodle, the community, but the business side of things he kind of outsourced to the Moodle partners. And so we became a Moodle partner in Australia. Yeah, and I wear a lot of other hats. Probably more importantly, I'm a father and a husband. And I'm a geeky kind of person as well. Love my Doctor Who. Probably leading on to this presentation is that I also did start a PhD in 2000. I started it. I put my initial kind of applications in and got accepted and so on. And I was looking at cross-border security and terrorism, and mainly around the Southeast Asia region and kind of how it applied to Australia. But I thought it was actually quite a boring topic and it wouldn't keep my interest, so I stopped it. And then the whole 9/11 thing happened the next year, and yeah, I thought, wow, I could have been a world expert in this. There's probably a lot of money that I could have been making just going on talk shows and saying, yes, we need to beef up security and so on. Which does make the point about a lot of things. You never know what's going to happen until it happens, and this is probably something that does apply to security. A lot of the times it's about trying to prevent something happening before it does. And yeah, again, if there's any questions, chuck them in the chat. Oops, I just realized I was talking about my various hats, and I changed it on my screen but not yours. So yes, I wear various hats. All right. Father hat probably has various different things to it. So moving on. Security. So what does it mean? So basically, I went to Wikipedia because, you know, that's the, yeah, my father hat is pink. Two pink father hats. Security. So I went to Wikipedia because that is the source of all knowledge, as we know. It's absolutely correct. And so this is the definition they had. Security is the degree of resistance to or protection from harm. It applies to any vulnerable and valuable assets, such as a person, dwelling, community, nation, or organization. So basically, as it applies to a Moodle site, it's everything around the site. It's trying to protect your site from harm. And I did have another definition there. I can't remember what it was now. Yeah, but it's trying to identify things and protecting yourself from harm before it happens. And so there's kind of these important concepts around security. You can read up about it. But there's the idea of risk, which is basically any possible event that could happen that might cause you harm or cause loss. There's a threat, which is associated with that, which is basically a method of triggering that risk event. That leads on to there being a vulnerability. In other words, there's a weakness in your system or whatever it is you're talking about. And an exploit is basically putting some legs to that vulnerability. It's triggering the threat. The other outcome of having a threat is that you actually identify it and you put in some countermeasures. In other words, you put in some measures in place that is a way to stop the threat. And basically that leads on to assurance. And ideally, the ultimate aim of doing security analysis and looking at things is to give your end users, your stakeholders, some assurance that the system they are using is safe for them. And so, and basically that's what people, when I go to training and I get facilitators asking me about security in Moodle and what should they do, they really are looking for assurance. Quite often it's just about the Moodle code. Is it secure? You know, are the processes we have in place for updates sensible? And it really is about assuring them and so that they can assure their end users. And if you've been doing a lot of computer work and you're involved in a large organization, there are actually standards for this. ISO put out standards for security and for all sorts of things. And so we've actually had to go through a process. One of our clients had to meet, I forget which standard it was, when there's ISO big numbers. So part of that was they had to look at their online learning. We actually host that. And so They had to look at us, our processes. They had to look at the data center where it's hosted, and so on. And it was good to know we actually did pass all the requirements. Actually, it's probably a good question. Has anyone done security analysis on their systems, how they're set up and their processes? Even if that's informal, actually. I mean, I guess you're constantly informally looking at it. Ah, is that the one, Stuart, is it? It might be. I really can't remember the number. Yeah. All I know is we had to answer a lot of questionnaires, so yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Look, I'm not, yeah. And Tabitha, I think that's the way a lot of people actually do it, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just asking the questions, and I guess sometimes knowing which questions to ask as well. What is the appropriate question? So basically, I guess almost the rest of my presentation here is really asking questions. It's questions that I've asked, and it's probably, I'm more opening up for discussion, what questions should be asked, and also identifying who the responsible people are. Again, quite often it's just a reaction to how I've been talking to facilitators in the past, where they've come in, they've been a teacher who's been thrown into an online learning environment, not knowing anything about code or server setups and so on, and then saying, well, who is responsible for these systems? Who should I be talking to? Is this my responsibility? Is it someone else's? And so it's just, I just thought I'd give some of that information here. All right. So moving on, make sure we get the right screen. Well, Tabitha, I actually have got that in here, funny enough. So there is this saying, the most secure system in the world is the one that no users can access, which would be completely secure. It would be great. No one could break it because they couldn't get into it. It'd be a little black box that just sits somewhere that no one could touch, no one could even look at, maybe, but it would be completely unusable. And so it's important. It's important that there's a balance between these two concepts of being secure and having a usable system as well. And I guess in Australia, it's probably a very pertinent conversation when they're making laws about looking at metadata that we do online versus your privacy, and then trying to give people the freedom to do what they want. And you know, there's going to be this fight happening, you know, but I think that you can have a balance, and it's good to have ongoing discussions, because, you know, sometimes the scale looks at one way and you just need to balance it out. It does make me sad, though, on Moodle sites, and this is a very personal view, but it does make me sad when the IT person in an organization is complete control of a Moodle site. Because an IT person, and hear me, I do come from an IT background as well as education, that quite often your IT focus is security. You want to lock a system down. However, there's a balance to that an educator knows the tools they need and so on. You know, whereas an IT person, without knowing what the tools are for, will just say, no, they shouldn't be used. So I found that a lot of times, and even to the point, Meg will probably back me up on this, we've had people contact us, and Stuart, you guys probably have had this as well, where they said, hey, would you, yeah, we want to host a Moodle site. We'll go, sure, we can do it for you. And, you know, they want to be the administrator. And then their question is, do we have to tell our IT staff? And I say, well, because you're hosted on our servers, no, you don't have to. It might be good to let them know, though, because they do have some expertise in certain areas. So my take on that, and again, yeah, and Meg's got it right. Quite often, IT will just lock things down, and they do have good reasons for being that way. So I don't think it should be completely the other way too. But there's a balance. Have the conversations together, working together. You can probably find that balance of making a usable system, putting in the tools in place that you need, but also making it secure. One of the best conversations I've ever been a part of was at Hong Kong University many years ago. Dom, who works with us here, Dom and myself actually at very last minute had to do a presentation to the staff at the university. We were up there, and we basically had the Vice Chancellor, the head of e-learning, we had the head of IT and a few other staff in there. And for about an hour, they grilled us with questions and about Moodle. So this is about 5 years ago. Grilled us with questions about Moodle, you know, about code updates, how security patches are made, what type of systems it needs to run on, and they were very tough questions. But the best thing at the end of well, towards the end of that meeting, is the head of IT. I can still remember him. Now works in Melbourne, actually. He stood up and he looked at the Vice Chancellor and the other staff. He said, look, he goes, I'm happy they've answered my questions. He goes, whether you want to use the system or not is completely up to you as educators. He goes, but I'm confident that we can support you in providing e-learning. And I thought, you know, there's an IT person who is completely focused on their job. They're not trying to tell the education staff what to do, but they're working with them to give them a secure system that is also usable. So ideally, that's the kind of relationship you want to have if you're not the IT person. And again, if you are the IT person, that's the sort of relationship you probably want with the educators who are using the site as well. And feel free, if you disagree with me, just to chuck in the chat. As I said, it's a personal opinion. Oh, Meg hears my whinges all the time, actually. So moving on. So basically, just want to look at different types of security if you are an administrator. And as I said, I'm focusing more on the teachers, so people who really don't have that technical knowledge. Yeah, I do. And so I was just looking at the different levels, and these are really just simple slides and really to ask questions. So I've got a couple for each. Let me get on. I love XKCD cartoons as well, so I'll put a few of those in. So the first one I thought might as well cover is the server hardware. Now, yeah, I live my life by XKCD. I think you could probably find a cartoon that applies to every situation. The theory. Should test it out one day. So the first one is server hardware. Now, what a server is can be a lot of things. It's basically just a happy little computer that's running that is serving out information somewhere. They can take all sorts of shapes and sizes. It could be a laptop, could be a desktop, could be a very old Macintosh computer. Hopefully you're not using that one anymore. That was pretty good at the time. Ideally, most people will be running on servers that sit in data centers or cloud environments, and the physical servers will probably look like that picture up the top right. They'll just be in server racks somewhere in a data center. Actually, I was reminiscing. I think my first computer was a ZX80. Anyway, and then I got a Sega SC3000, and then a Commodore, I think. Yeah, I've still got the ZX80 somewhere. With its expanded up to 8K memory, I think it was. It's just anyway. So the server hardware. So basically, it's a physical server. Most of us will never even have to touch one of those. But you could run your laptop as a server as well. I expect all the Moodle experts probably do have versions of Moodle running on their. Oh, excellent, Tabitha. Oh, ZX81 was it? Yes. I think I've still got some games somewhere, Stuart. We should talk offline and we can share them. So Load Runner was great on the Macs. Remember that? Actually, you can get it still, Meg. You can actually, anyway, I get distracted. So what a server is, it depends on what you're running. Ideally, if you're in a production environment, it will be one of those ones in the top right, sitting in a data center somewhere, a very hardened one. Now, I mean, questions around that. Oh, really, Randy? I think, Randy, my first Moodle server which I had sitting in the office next to me, or sitting next to me on the floor, was an old 486. I think it had, I don't know, it's like 256 meg of RAM and wasn't much. Used to tick over. It used to be fine for doing development though. Yeah. Oh, that is a problem, Tabitha. Problems we face, eh? So just look at the slide, and as I said, I've just put down questions here, and I really haven't thought these through in any great detail. It's just questions that crossed my mind. But one of them is this, who has access to the servers? Which is a very important point. So for us, this is a very pertinent question. We actually partner with Amazon, so we base our servers are based on Amazon cloud services, and we obviously have control over them, what software is on there, and so on. But it is an important question: who can actually get access to the servers? I mean, it's a problem if anyone can walk off the street and go up to our server, because the potentials for grabbing data, for just the loss of the servers going down, is tremendous. So we want to be sure that our data center is protecting us in some way. And I guess at a smaller level, if you are hosting yourself, there's things about the actual hardware itself. How reliable is it? What happens when a component fails? What happens if you have a firewall, hardware firewall type system? When that fails, does that open it up? So it's thinking about those components. And I promise not to be too techy, so I won't go any more detail. But if you are the IT staff, these are the questions you should be thinking about the hardware. And who's responsible for this? As I said, people ask me who is responsible for it. It could be a range of people. It could be the IT department at your school, at your university, on your organisation. If you've got these servers set up in house, it could be a data centre. So much like we do. It could be your internet service provider. So they may be, or any web hosting provider, depending on who you sign up with. Or it could be a Moodle services partner. So, if you host with ours, if you host with HRDNZ, or any of the other partners around the world, they're the ones who should be asking these questions about the hardware, ensuring that the hardware will stand up, that there is no unauthorized access to the actual hardware itself. People can't go plug a USB drive in as they want to, and so on. And again, I don't know, maybe you can think up questions as well. As I said, I haven't really thought this through a lot. Randy, really good point. Yes, that's important. That's actually important on a lot of levels. I was thinking for us, because we have a lot of government sites, there were problems. So the Australian government, we couldn't host them. We still do have servers in the United States, but because of the Patriot Act, government departments in Australia wouldn't allow their sites to be hosted on our servers in the US, which was quite interesting. And so, yeah, Brandy, you probably know this very well. We face those type issues as well. And the laws in each country, will determine on who has access to it as well. If I'm right, and you can correct me, I'm pretty sure the Patriot Act just gives government officials the right to go and take the server and walk away with it if they wanted to, and even access it, tell the data center they need access to it. And I was getting onto that, Tabitha. Yes, I was getting to some of that. Absolutely. Which is getting more into the server software side. How they open up access to them in terms of the internet access to them. So I'll move on. Probably a short time actually. Leads me on to this one, is about the server software. So I'm just leaving the cartoon up there for a second to read. If you can read it, might need to zoom it in. And for those who don't know Big Blue Button, you can zoom in on your own screen actually as well. It will do the zooming for you. Right, so server software. So these are the things like the operating system. So something like, you're using Windows or some Linux derivative, so Debian then, or Macs or whatever it is. So the operating system. It's also the other software on there. So we're talking like web servers, database servers. There could be a whole range of things. Without getting into too much detail of all those. And so that forms another, I guess, a layer. There's the hardware underneath, there's the server software that sits on top of that. And so there's security risks around that. My take on this is that probably most of the attacks that we suffer as a Moodle hosting provider actually happen at this level. It's people trying to attack our servers. And you know, there's some things you can do to mitigate that, and that's probably asking us questions that Tabitha wrote there as well. So, you know, what ports are open at the data center? Thankfully for us, we have complete control over that by Amazon's cloud services. Yeah, and what settings they have. Yeah. I didn't even put that one in, Stuart. That is a really good point. Moving on. So yeah, so the different questions you might want to ask around that. So what sort of user environment are you in? So this is where Tabitha's question was, who else do they host? So if, for example, as an example, you might have a dedicated server set up somewhere. Maybe it's not a cloud environment, but maybe you have a dedicated server. But maybe there's multiple hosts on that server, multiple clients, users who access that server. So you're one portion of it, which I guess is a cloud environment actually. But there's other people on there. So it depends on how the server software is set up. It will depend on what those other users have access to. If it's set up well, they shouldn't be seeing any of your files, but that's not always the case. So this is where it's worth asking those questions. And again, I think it's a question for IT staff. I really wouldn't expect a teacher who is using Moodle to be asking these questions or even thinking about them. There's something you would expect. If you're IT staff, I would be expecting you to ask these questions. So the user environment, are you on a shared hosting environment, for example? And just to give a bit of information about our services, we actually do both types. We do shared cloud instances. That makes sense. Lines kind of blur a bit. But then we set up the server software. So one user on our instance cannot access any files or even see the files from another user. So we keep them all compartmentalized for security reasons. However, you also have things like server software where users accessing the software can slow the system down as well. So if you're on a shared environment where you're sharing physical resources, there's an issue. And we have struck this recently, where we've had one client who had then decided their 300 students all at once should do a particular quiz. And while it kind of maintained it okay for them, when you added on all the other people using that same physical resources, it really did slow it down. Yeah, Tabitha, shotgun. So let me come back to that one actually. Just made a note then. Yeah, the HTTPS. I suspect you already know the answer actually. And Tabitha, this is actually really good because you're like one slide ahead of me all the time, which is good. Which I say is the sign of a good presentation, if people asking questions that you're leading on to. Doesn't mean this is a good presentation. Yes, there is, Stuart. So yeah, I might as well talk about that now. Yes. So HTTPS, it's basically a change in URL if you're moving. And so it's going through the database and changing any links that were straight HTTP to HTTPS. There is a database search and replace from Moodle. I think it's Moodle 2 onwards. It's located in your site URL /admin/tool/replace. So how about type that in the chat? Yeah. By the way, that admin tool has been around since Moodle 1.6 or 7. It was a slightly different location, but there's no other way to get there. There's no link to it because it is quite a dangerous script to use. because you're basically taking one piece of text in your database and changing it to something else. So if you get it wrong, yeah, it could cause problems. The other thing, Tabitha, if you do use that script, it goes through most tables every now and then. Yeah. We found sometimes it doesn't change all the links, but it's pretty good at covering it. So, yeah. All right. So let me move on. So server software. Was the server set up as a server is probably a very good question as well. So what I mean by that is if you have used one of those Moodle download, the installer packages for Windows or a Mac, they are basically Moodle put on top of server software. It's got Apache in there and MySQL, so a database server, and it's really doing the job for you, and they work great. So I have multiple versions of Moodle running on my Mac, my laptop, as well as my desktop and so on for development purposes. However, those installer packages are designed to be easy to install. They're not designed to be secure. So they make a very bad server environment. You wouldn't use those when you're setting up your server. And again, we've done a lot of consultancy work where we have actually gone to clients who have given us remote access, and I've seen they've used the downloaded packages, and just the sort of holes they have in their server settings. I won't go into all those, but they're just not ideal. You really should set up the server software from scratch if you're that IT person. So is your server set up as a server? It should be, there's a difference between a desktop and a laptop and a server. A server is a very special setup. So getting that set up properly. And just knowing what type of system you're using as well is probably just good information to know. Are you running on a Windows environment or a LAMP stack? So most of the world's web servers are probably LAMP stacks. At the very least, there'll be Linux and Apache as the web server. M stands for MySQL, and P is PHP, which Moodle has written in web scripting language. So it's just knowing that information. My suggestion to the IT people is, in terms of security, update your software regularly. So we have a lot of automatic scripts on our servers that do updates every night. So we just get the latest patches. So when we heard about things like the Heartbleed bug, some of you may know about that. It was an issue that came out about a year ago now. Our servers were actually patched overnight automatically before I'd even got the notification about the bug. And then I went back and checked, and they'd been patched. So if you can put some processes in place that help you with that, that is great. Yeah, and as I said, most of our attacks happen at this level. It's we just call them script kiddies. People have too much time. You can find great little scripts on the web that you give them an IP address server, and they will just go and attack it in some way. To give you some figures, last time I actually looked, it was probably 3 to 4 dedicated attacks a day per IP address that we have. People just trying to get in using SSH or FTP or whatever it is. Yeah, Stuart, there is risks associated with that too. The risks are more that your server may go down if the update crashes. So I guess it's trusting the scripts. I don't write them myself, so we get them as part of server software and so on. We set up update things that way. Just gives me some confidence that they've gone through a lot of testing and a lot of other people using them. Yeah, so the risks are that sure the update could break and your site or your server will go down. Every now and then, so our notifications and our setup is we sometimes get notifications that there's an update waiting that we have to do it manually as well, which is quite good. Again, we're on a Linux environment, which is pretty good actually. If an update fails, it generally can drop back, which is quite nice. Oh, that's great, Natalie, actually, yeah. And that probably goes along with Moodle as well. Notifications pages always let you know what new versions are coming out. Maybe it needs a stronger message in there saying, please update. Yeah. We actually ban WordPress sites on our servers now because the default installs that people use are usually insecure. And so we found a lot of sites, yeah, Meg will say thankfully, they don't harden their WordPress. They don't know how to set it up properly, which has opened up our servers to people using it, uploading scripts, and then our servers get used for spam purposes, which blacklists our IP address and so on. Yes, Tabitha, you're talking about Moodle security updates? Yeah. Well, they're accurate in terms of that they are serious or minor. I guess again, you're a slide ahead of me. It's what scenario those security risks apply to is probably what you need to read into them. So, which I actually probably will jump onto my next slide because I'll be answering it. Yeah, sure, Tabitha. Got a camera. So you work for the NSA, don't you? In terms of responsibility for service, it probably serves me right. Who's responsible? IT department. It's the same ones. Data center, your internet service provider, if they're providing this service for you, or your Moodle services partner, if that's who you're with. So basically, whoever's hosting your site are responsible for the physical hardware and the server software that sits on top of it. Okay. Yeah, I'm a bit worried now. So let me move on to my next one. It's got one of my favorite XKCDs on it. Yeah, so Stuart, I think you make a good point there. So that's an example of where I think if you have if a Moodle security notification comes through to you, it's understanding the context. If it applies only to LDAP and you're not using LDAP, then obviously it's not as serious for you. So it's just understanding those things. Yeah. Yeah, so definitely worth reading, see if it applies to you. My take on the Moodle security issues is that there really aren't any major ones that apply to everybody. They just don't happen these days, mainly because the processes they go through at Moodle headquarters and the testing catch a lot of things. Just the coding, the Scrum methodology and the sprint cycles they use are really good. You know, for me, I've sometimes just had to change a word in Moodle, which counts as a little tracker issue. It goes in there. And this is really to give you assurance of the Moodle code. There's at least 2 other people who look at me changing a word, and it might just be an interface word. Just that minor change, there's at least 2 other people who have to look at that code change before it gets put into the core code. And that's even before it goes through testing. So it does give you some confidence in the processes they have in place. Yeah, so Sarah, that's a point. I'll come to that actually, talking about doing updates. So the Moodle code, talking about what the Moodle code is, so how this sits on top of everything. So we have the physical hardware, trying to get this on camera. Then on top of that is the server software. Then on top of that is really Moodle. And Moodle is made up of 3 main pieces, which is actually the code that it's written in. There's the data directory where your files are, uploaded PDF, it actually goes into the Moodle data directory. And there's the database, so it's things like your settings and pieces of your content sit in there. So Moodle, a running site is made up of those 3 pieces. Within the code, there's also your plugins. You've added any extra little plugins that you put in there. So you might think, hey, I really like the progress bar block. I'm going to add that into my site, and so that goes as a additional plugin. It goes in the code area, and it sits in there. There's also a file called the config.php file. It's for the configuration. That is, in a non-nerdy terms, that's a file that tells the Moodle code how to communicate with the data directory and a database. It lets all 3 talk together. And Elliott, yes, this is one of my favorite XKCD cartoons. I'm running out of time. So with the Moodle code, so a few things in here. Understanding the Moodle version numbers. So if you're not on top of that, it's probably worth looking it up. Essentially, the versions come out every 6 months now. So every year there's an odd version and an even version. So 2.9 was just released in May. 3.0 will be coming out, I think Martin's going that way, in November. So May and November of every year. and understanding the support that goes with those as well. So each version has 12 months worth of support for bug fixes and 18 months worth of support for security patches that are made. So I mention that because I come across sites where they're using a version of Moodle that's 2 years old, which, if you think about it, it's back to 2.7, 2.5 would be 2 years old, or 2.6, yeah. And so the problem is it's not supported. If there is security holes found, and the security issues may actually apply to your site, it's just that there's no patch made. Yeah, you're right, Randy. I still see 1.9 sites. We actually still host one that's on 1.9, so I'm trying to move them on. I won't mention who it is because it's quite a large site. And as an example, I was in a training session in Melbourne 2 weeks ago, and I had someone from the Defence Force there, so the Australian Defence Force, who was almost in tears because she couldn't get her site upgraded, and they were on 2.3 or 2.4 of Moodle. And the reason was because they said their staff, their IT staff, have to look over every line of code for security reasons. Which was quite funny that they have a site now that is actually quite insecure, and it's and it's insecure for the reason of security. They won't let them put any more code on there. I can sort of see where they're coming from, but yeah, kind of defeats the purpose in a lot of ways. So questions, you should be asking here. Actually, I'll go back to that slide just to talk about that cartoon, why it's important. It's the idea that any data that someone puts into your site, if they fill out a form, if they put, when they put in their username, password, all of these things actually go and get either put in the database or compared to data that's in the database. And so a lot of the work that happens in Moodle behind the scenes is sanitizing data. What that means is when any user puts some information in, they submit a form, what Moodle has to do is take that data and make sure it doesn't affect the database. And so that cartoon is about that, that someone's named their son with some SQL that will affect the database, which is, yeah, the lesson being they should sanitize their data as it gets input into the system. Oh, Tabitha, you're just hitting me with questions. Yes, so that's a very good question, though. Why should your site be registered? Absolutely. If you haven't registered your site, please go and register it. So if you're an administrator, you'll get the link. There's a second link in your administration menu, registration. You'll also see it in the notifications page. The important, really, it's I guess a couple of reasons you want to register your site. One is that as long as you don't make it private, you'll get a link on the Moodle.org page. So Moodle.org/sites will redirect, but that's the site. You'll get a link there, and that's actually good Google juice. If you need to bump your site up in the Google rankings, because Moodle's ranked so highly, the fact that it links to your site will bump your ranking up as well. Oh, outstanding, Stuart. And the second reason to register your site is that you'll get notifications, essentially. So when new versions come out, when there's a security patch to be made, it just lets you know. And they're very low volume. I was going to say, you probably all know that for those of you who get notifications, you'd probably say maybe an email every 2 months or so. Yeah, Tabitha, good Google juice or bad Google juice? I guess it depends, really, whether you want to bump your rankings up on Google will be known there. Yeah. But yeah, certainly registering your site, the main advantage is getting email notifications. So if there is a security patch that needs to be made, Martin, basically, the security issues in the tracker get in a special region that's only a security team that can look at them, so not publicly viewable. Basically, they have a policy of responsible disclosure. You can read that on the doc site. Essentially, it goes like this. They'll make a patch. As soon as they do, they actually notify the Moodle partners first. Then they will notify the administrators of sites, and then they will make a public notice about it. Yeah, you probably have a site registered somewhere, Tabitha. So Yeah. The problem is when you have multiple sites yeah, you get multiple notifications. So let me just speed this up a bit. So Moodle code, third-party plugins. So coming back to your question from earlier, this is if you're installing third-party plugins, you probably want to just do a bit of homework about the plugin. Just because it sits in the plugins database at moodle.org doesn't mean it's secure. There's some checks there. There's user reviews. It does go through some basic checks, but not a hard security check. A lot of the times, just knowing the developers, So some of those OU plugins are great. Tim Hunt's had a big hand in that. So I trust anything that's got his name against it. So knowing the developers, maybe asking around the community if you don't know, who uses this, have you found a problem with it? Our policy for installing third-party plugins is that we'll give it a quick check. Basically, if it's a plugin we already know, we will install it for people. If it's a plugin we don't know, we will look at the code and we'll make one of two recommendations or three recommendations. One is, yep, it's fine, we'll install it. The other one is we need to update some of the code, it's not secure. Every now and then we'll say we are not touching this and we will not have it on our servers. You need to get it rewritten in some way. Yeah, Natalie, so you're saying, not registering any sites. My take on the sites we host is probably 1 in 5 or 6 sites actually do register, which gives you some information about the registered sites, how many sites there actually are in the world. Just want to make that point about sanitizing data. Moodle does a huge job behind the scenes. It does a job with, there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes. Just what time I won't go into it all. Yeah. So Moodle, so the core code, who has access to the code is an important one as well. So just look into that. In Moodle now you can install plugins via the administration interface. That does require some service setup to make that viable. But if that's the case, then any administrator can install third-party plugins with no checks. When was it last updated? There's always changes happening to the code. We actually update our clients. We do minor updates on them under live sites. We do that actually every 28 to 30 days if we can. So major versions we do on request, but we push people when it gets too old. Who's responsible? So essentially this is your IT department, your site administrators. So we're getting down to that level. Or again, your Moodle services partner if you're using them. I'll scream on. I have one last area to look at. Oh, SSL question. Sorry, yes. Yeah, and Tabitha was asking about similar as well, moving over to it. Yeah, okay. So Sarah asked, just for the recording, I'll read this out. SSL question. Login page only versus the whole site. Is a Moodle site vulnerable, unsecured, only the login page under SSL? A host discourages full site SSL, saying it will slow down the site. Okay, there's a lot of areas of that. Essentially, SSL, you'll see it when you go to a site that has, usually you see a little green padlock icon at the top left, and the link will be HTTPS, or have an S after it. So that's if you're using SSL. And what that does, that encrypts everything between your browser and the end server. And so the idea is if anyone listens along the way, or if they're peeking into the network path, even if they get the information, they can't decrypt it. They don't know what's been said. Now, why it's important is that if you are on an open Wi-Fi network, as an example, if you go to McDonald's, you use their free Wi-Fi, anyone else who's on that Wi-Fi network can actually see any information that's being passed. And you can get plugins for your browsers that do this. Free plugins, and you can just sit on the Wi-Fi network and see what other people are doing. So if someone comes, if you're using a Moodle site that's not under SSL and you put in your username and password, and you're on an open Wi-Fi network, someone else can go and get that password, essentially. So that's the reason, yeah. And so now it's basically just accepted as good policy that most sites should be under SSL. And I actually note that the iMoot site isn't. So probably should look into that. That's the reason behind it. And so it doesn't just affect the login page. It could be all sorts of things throughout Moodle. Any information you're passing from your browser up to the site and coming back could be sniffed, is the term that they use. Someone else could see what's happening there. So in terms of installing them, to get an SSL certificate, it's a bit of a process. You have to go and get one from one of these sites like VeriSign or TrustWave. There's quite a few of them. They actually also, it's not just a matter of paying them. They will actually ring you up. They will verify that you are from the company you say you are. That the certificate not only secures things, it authenticates you as well. So it's for that reason. So it is suggested you use SSL almost on most sites that you use. In terms of slowing the servers down, Sarah, honestly, it does take a bit more work because the server has to decrypt any information you send to it, and it has to encrypt any information you send out. However, we use it on our sites, and we find very little performance degradation. It's very minor. And basically, most of your oh, well, that's good to know, Stuart, actually. So Stuart said 3 to 5% slowdown. Yeah, the server software, so the web, it's basically your web server has to do that work. We use Apache web server. It runs really well, and it's basically designed. That's its job, and so they write the software to do it as fast as possible. So I think most web hosts these days accept that things are on SSL, and then you basically allocate your resources accordingly. You just accept that that's what you have to deal with. So my advice, Sarah, and again, it's probably from my experience, is just, yeah, you should be going with SSL if you can. Yeah, it's a good thing. And again, a lot of it is people may not be on networks where others will be looking at their information, but it's coming back to that point of assurance. It's letting your users know they see the little green padlock. They'll be very used to seeing it. They just know that it's a secure site, and it may not do anything, but at least they feel confident in the site. Yeah, I hope that helps. And yeah, people are writing some good comments in here as well about different things. So moving on, Meg's giving me the hurry up behind the scenes, so I'll just blaming you, Meg, for me rushing. So last one was just about Moodle settings. So it's a very hard cartoon to see, but it's a very funny one. Moodle settings. So there's actually a Moodle security report. So I really suggest you go and run that on your site, just in the site administration. I've just done a screenshot of one of our sites. So you can see most of them are green. There's some warnings. If there is a risky setting, that it'll come up in red. So basically we'll let you know there's a bad setting. Some of those are not big issues. So but we have a writable config.php file, but the only people who can write to it is the people who have the accounts. So for us, it doesn't really affect the running of the site. It's not that. So it comes up as a warning. It's not really a big issue. Actually, Natalie, I think probably it covers most of the points. I grabbed this from a 2.8 site, this screenshot. But I actually think in terms of your Moodle settings, it does cover the major ones. Honestly, a Moodle site the default settings in Moodle are pretty good. Yeah, because security does cover a lot of things. I'm not even touching on most of it, actually. Like role definitions. You can do all sorts of insecure things there as well. But the default settings in Moodle are quite secure, so that roles work as you expect them to work. It's only when you are one of those people who has to change them, which, like me, that you can get things that are insecure. So it's just, I guess, it's having information before you go and change things. Yeah, it's as Stuart says. Yeah, so the security report's just a great place to start. First thing to look at. We also do this for performance too. People call us up, say, "Look at our server; it's running really slow." We run the performance report. That brings up some really good settings that people sometimes change, like putting theme designer mode on. One of the points I just wanted to make on this slide was, and the cartoon alludes to this, is about user passwords. And this is really just to give you some information, if you don't know how Moodle deals with its passwords, is that one of the things built into Moodle is that it hashes the password. So when the user then there's a password on the account, it's not stored. Moodle doesn't store the password. What it does a hash. And that's like a little function. You put the password in, out the other end, you get this random piece of text. And it's basically a one-to-one relationship. To that password, there's a unique piece of hashy text, and Moodle stores that. The point is that little piece of hashy text, you can't go back the other direction. From that, you can't determine what the original password was. So when you put your password into Moodle, what it does, it actually hashes the password you input and compares the two hashes together. And the reason is if someone managed to get into your database, or they do a course backup, because if you're doing user data, it has to store the user accounts, the hashes go as part of that. What it does, it means that no one can, from that hash, if they get access to that hashed password, they can't work out what your original password is, therefore they can't enter it. Moodle also does a thing, and there are sites that will do brute force attacks on these hashes. In other words, they have a dictionary of, we know these hashes match up with these pieces of text, and so they do brute force attacks. Only works on very insecure passwords. But so part of Moodle's thing to get around that is there's actually a salt, and it's set up by default these days. You can change it in the configuration file if you get access to that, which is another random piece of text. So what it does now, you put your password in, it puts a random piece of text at the front and then concatenates it, then hashes it. Yeah, so there's a lot of work behind the scenes to secure the data. You don't really, it's not that important to know. It's just, I guess I'm trying to give you confidence that the Moodle code, there's a lot of work to secure your data that's sitting behind the scenes. And it was on this slide, I actually had made a note, Tabitha issues. So it was, yeah, so as I said, they relate to very, very specific circumstances often. So it's just working out whether those circumstances apply to you and making those patches. Yeah. And so the cartoon makes a very good point, and I love that thing's a little tag at the bottom. Through 20 years of effort, we've successfully trained everyone to use passwords that are hard for humans to remember, but easy for computers to guess. As you said, there are 4 just dictionary words put together. Correct horse battery sample is actually harder for a computer to hack than the random piece of text up the top left. Take it with a pinch of salt, because there are pieces of software that yeah that deal with that can do dictionary attacks. So Moodle has a password policy, and it's on by default. Yeah, yeah. So Tabitha's probably alluding to that. The password policy in Moodle sometimes annoys me, and some sites, if all sites had the same policy, I'd be fine. It's just that sometimes they have different ones. And you have to think up a new password or a new variation of the password that you use to use on that site. Yeah. Yeah, Sarah. So let me get to that actually. Yeah, DDoS attacks. So that's actually the whole reason we did this presentation, was someone asked about that. Let me just finish off the next slide. I will get back to the DDoS attacks. Oops. I think to last slide. Sorry, I've just gone a few minutes over. I hope that's okay. I think I said I only got 2 slides to go through. Just around the Moodle settings. So what type of users will access your site? Just questions you might want to ask yourself. Are you expecting everyone from the whole world, or are you controlling your users? If that's the case, if you're controlling them, then why would you, why would you let users sign up for their own accounts? Should the first thing they ever see be the login page, not the front page? So would you force logins? So it's just thinking about the usage of your site and then the settings that go around that. Yeah, absolutely, Stuart. And that's another point too, Stuart, just leading on from that. Your username is never displayed in a Moodle site, ever. So if you want to log in as someone else, you actually need to find their username and their password. You could look over their shoulder, I guess, to see it. But the core code will never display the username to non-admins. Admins are the only people who can see those usernames. Other question, have you run the security port in Moodle? Capture elements, if you are letting people sign up for their own accounts, put it's called reCAPTCHA in Moodle, which is the Google project. That just stops people running scripts that will automatically sign up new accounts on your site. Meg will testify to this. We had a client who was allowing anyone in the world to sign up for new accounts without a capture element, and it's a government department actually. And yeah, by the time we caught it, yeah, over 100,000 new user accounts on their site. So, and the simple solution was to put a capture element on there. Yeah, so Randy, that is an issue. Yeah, the only way to reset a username in Moodle if a user forgets it is for an administrator to do it or some other system to do it. Yeah. There's a password reset, but yeah, the username is an issue. Is your site open to Google? You know, that's a setting you have to turn on. It works for some sites, not very many. So Moodle.org is a good example where you do want Google to go in and get the results, and so you can get them in searches at Google. Email settings, I'm just putting that down as an example. You know, if you don't set it up right, and so defaults usually work, and this gets down to between Moodle settings and your server settings, so the whoever's hosting you. If you've got a lot of forum posts coming out, a lot of spam programs will say, well, there's a lot of emails coming from this IP address. It actually looks like spam, and they'll blacklist your IP addresses. So we've had that. We've also had it where we have a public Moodle server for a government department. And so you have users that will send out emails from the Moodle service. There might be forum posts, but they come from their government email address. And what happens when it tries to get into the internal network is that the internal network goes, no, there shouldn't be any emails generated from these email addresses outside of our network. And so these little catches and places where you just need to think about your setup and the users that you've got on there. And obviously we can't elaborate on every possible setup, but it's just, again, I'm just trying to encourage people to think through how your site is used and the potential problems you might face. The last, I've got a little note here too. Does your site connect to other systems? That's a big one as well. So if you're connecting to an LDAP server, you're connecting to a student information system, you know, will a vulnerability in that system affect yours? And if someone can get into that one, is there a single sign-on that will get them into your system? Likewise, going the other way, if someone wrecks something in Moodle, will it be a problem going to an external system that you're pushing information to as well? So thinking about Moodle being part of a whole ecology of systems that you will have running. Moodle being the learning management system, but you might have student management systems and so on. And so it is worth at some point someone at least taking a kind of 20,000 foot view of the different systems. Oh, yes. Oh, so many questions. All right. All right, let me move on. Last slide is just the questions one anyway. So, so let me try and get through all these. So just to sum that up. So that was just some areas of Moodle. I said I wasn't going in depth. It was more, that's, I guess, feedback from conversations I've had with people who are not techies in any way, but trying to give them assurance that the Moodle code itself is generally fine. But who is responsible for those other areas? And usually it's your IT staff. It's not the administrator who might not have any IT knowledge. You may have both roles, but generally, if there's a server issue, go back to whoever's hosting the server. If it's your Moodle settings, then yes, as a Moodle administrator, that is one of your responsibilities. So Tabitha, sorry, I'll just do some of these questions. Mahara and Turnitin and the likes, yes, that's what I mean. So you're connecting to other systems. Both of those are probably okay, actually, funnily enough, although Turnitin, it's been issues with the connection. In terms of security, though, it's pretty good, and Mahara is obviously very good as well. But quite often people will write their own plugins, or they'll do a single sign-on, they hack together a single sign-on from another system, and it's those kind of things I'm thinking where there might be security issues. So coming back, I think it was Sarah's question about, maybe not. Let me do the DDoS question that Sarah asked before. So a DDoS is a dedicated denial of service attack. To explain what that is, for those who don't speak Jedi, it's basically where your server sits here and someone wants to attack you, and what they do, they have control of several other computers around the web, and they get each of those to just do, like they try to log into your server, whether it's behind the scenes using SSH or FTP, one of these other protocols. And basically what happens is, or they're just doing page requests, they're basically flooding the server with requests so it gets overloaded. And what happens is the real users who try to come in can't get there either, because the server is just suffering under the load. So the way to get around that, again, this is actually an IT issue. So this is sitting at your data center or whoever's hosting the server. There are some things you can do. So you can, if you do load balance solutions and you put in active firewalls, I'm getting a bit nerdy here. So we run an active firewall protection on ours, which looks at requests. If there's too many requests coming from one IP address, it will actually block that IP address for a period of time. So that does help. Sometimes it gets false positives though, so where someone is actually doing valid work, it will actually lock them out as well. So that's one thing you can do. Sometimes the attacks are so complicated, there's nothing you can do. And in the news recently, there have been those kind of attacks on large sites. Yeah, again, with us, we partner with Amazon. Amazon have CloudFront, a content delivery network, which would mitigate some of that as well, because the place to attack is different because the content delivery networks around the world. So that doesn't mitigate it. But essentially, it is the issue at the at the server level. It's whoever's managing that server. So, Sarah, I hope that kind of explains it. In terms of Moodle settings, there's very little you can do actually. It's below that level. So Rob, I'm just jumping back up to your question back up there about the object embedding. Basically, it's disabled on Moodle sites. Moodle will strip out a lot of things you put in there. So when you're using the editor, if you go and put an HTML code, it actually does strip out a lot of tags, like object tags and embed tags. The reason for that is if you put in things like scripts, so you maybe put in a Flash script, or even JavaScript would actually do it, there's a possibility of passing information out or doing, you can do spoofing type attacks. So maybe you put in a piece of JavaScript that when the teacher comes along and clicks on a little button you put there, it actually grabs information about them or takes them to a site where it can pass that information on. So it's cross-site scripting essentially is the problem. So information from your site can be passed to another site, and it might not be about you, it might be about other users. So that's the reason behind blocking a lot of these things. There are settings about allowing object and embed tags. There's also a trusted content system in Moodle. So yeah, so I guess it's just looking at those settings. You know, if you trust your teachers, you're probably okay. It's a trust issue for end users and which users you trust. Sorry, I'm losing some of the questions here.
We may need to wrap up because you and I've got to go to the next sessions to moderate those, I think. So maybe we can ask questions to the forums.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, in the forums, guys. So let me just say thank you to you all. Yeah, if you want to hit the forums, I'll reply to as many questions as I can. Or you'll see me in other sessions anyway, so grab me in there if you want to. So thanks for your time. I hope that helped. As I said, it was just a very low-level talk and trying to cover a lot of areas. But yeah, take it for what it is. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Shane. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We'll see you in the next session.